It was a cool autumn evening in a small American town, the streets illuminated by the warm glow of street lamps reflecting off damp asphalt. The Johnson family had just returned from a celebration, a colleague's promotion, a birthday, a reason to escape the monotony of life for a few hours. Michael Johnson, the father, was in high spirits but had perhaps indulged in one drink too many. His laughter was loud, his voice boisterous, and there was a slight unsteadiness in his step. Sarah, his wife, smiled softly from the passenger seat, her hands gripping the seatbelt as if it were a lifeline, her heart aware of the risk that sometimes came with her husband's decisions. In the back seat, Ethan and Lily, their two children, were chattering about school, their voices innocent, unaware of the tension that lingered quietly in the air. They noticed their father's unusual cheer, laughing along, seeing nothing amiss, trusting completely in the man behind the wheel. Michael insisted on driving. "It's just a short ride," he had said, his words slightly slurred, a grin stretching across his face. He promised to be careful, to go slowly, yet the alcohol in his system clouded his judgment. The familiar suburban roads became dangerous that night, each curve more menacing than usual under the dim lights. The family drove in near silence for a while, the hum of the engine and the soft music from the car stereo filling the gaps in conversation. Sarah glanced at Michael, uneasy. Why'd he drink so much tonight? She thought, her anxiety rising, though she kept it buried for the sake of calm. She didn't want to ruin the night for the children. Then it happened. On a deserted stretch of road, a sudden figure appeared in the headlights. A man, crossing too quickly, distracted. Michael swerved, panic overtaking reason, but the car hit him. The sickening thud and the shattering of reality sent waves of shock through everyone. Michael's eyes widened, heart pounding. What have I done? He thought, his pulse racing, his hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. In an instant, a cascade of panic and fear overtook him. He knew the consequences. The police, the court, the end of his family's peace. Sarah screamed softly, reaching for the door, but Michael, frantic, looked back at his children, whose eyes were wide with confusion and terror. "Stay calm. We'll handle this," he said, though his voice trembled with deceit. He decided, in a split-second judgment fueled by fear, to drive away. The family returned home, each sitting in tense silence, the weight of the unsaid pressing down on them. Michael parked the car in the garage, heart still racing. He tried to appear normal, speaking cheerfully, attempting to mask the terror that gnawed at his insides. "Let's get inside, grab a snack," he said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. Sarah noticed the stiffness in his movements, the way his hands shook slightly as he reached for the doorknob. She could see the fear he tried to conceal, but she chose silence, telling herself, for the children, for the family, don't let him feel alone. Pretend everything is fine. The children, unaware of the magnitude of what had happened, played quietly in the living room. Their laughter, though faint, was a fragile thread holding the family together, a reminder of innocence untouched by guilt and fear. That night, Michael lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The image of the man, the sound of impact, and the crushing realization of what he had done replayed in his mind. Guilt and fear mingled, each emotion amplifying the other. He knew what he had done was wrong, unforgivable, yet the instinct to protect his family and himself overrode reason. Sarah, lying beside him, felt the cold distance that had grown between them in those brief moments of terror. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. The weight of what had happened hung over them silently, a shadow neither could dispel. Outside, the night carried on. The wind whispered through the trees, and the town slept, unaware of the darkness that had quietly settled over one family. The Johnsons had crossed an invisible line, a moral chasm that could never be undone. And in that silence, the first cracks in trust and integrity appeared, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet destined to grow, shaping the lives of every member of the family in ways they could not yet imagine. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, painting the living room in muted gold. Sarah awoke to the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards, and the distant laughter of her children. Yet there was a heaviness in the air, a tension that neither she nor Michael acknowledged openly. Breakfast was quiet. Ethan and Lily chatted about their school assignments, unaware of the silent storm swirling around them. Michael sat at the head of the table, coffee in hand, his movements precise and controlled. He smiled at the children, a practiced smile, the kind that concealed panic and guilt beneath its surface. Sarah watched him from across the table. He's pretending like nothing happened, she thought, sipping her tea, her hands trembling slightly. She wanted to ask him, wanted to confront him, but fear and love intertwined, paralyzing her voice. She chose silence, a fragile peace, for the sake of the family. By mid-morning, the local news had already reported the accident. A man had been found on a rural road, critically injured. The details were vague, but the community buzzed with speculation. Sarah's heart clenched as she saw Michael glance at the television, his expression calm, controlled, yet fleetingly betraying the guilt that lurked beneath. She tried to focus on mundane tasks, folding laundry, tidying the kitchen, speaking gently to the children. Yet every sound, every movement, seemed to echo the unspeakable secret they carried. He did this. He could have died, and we all live in the shadow of it, she thought, her chest tight with anxiety. Michael busied himself with work around the house, making phone calls, checking emails, attempting to rebuild a sense of normalcy. But Sarah noticed subtle inconsistencies in his behavior. A hand trembling as he picked up the newspaper, a pause too long in conversation, a gaze that lingered too long on the streets outside. She began to understand that his mind was not free. It was trapped in a cycle of denial, fear, and self-preservation. Hours turned into days. The family moved through routines mechanically, each task a distraction from the gnawing tension. Sarah found herself walking the children to school, watching them play, all the while calculating the consequences that could unravel their lives if the truth ever surfaced. She felt the weight of her own complicity in silence, torn between protecting her husband and preserving the moral integrity she valued deeply. Ethan, perceptive beyond his years, began to sense the unusual quiet, the restrained conversations, the fleeting moments when his parents' eyes avoided each other. "Mom," he asked one evening, "why do you look so worried?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She smiled faintly, choosing words carefully. "Nothing, sweetie. Just thinking about school and homework." But Ethan's gaze lingered, sharp and questioning. He was beginning to notice that something was wrong, that the harmony of their family life was fractured. The instinctive sense of right and wrong had awakened in him, and Sarah's careful masks of calm could not completely conceal the truth. That night, as the children slept, Sarah and Michael sat in the dimly lit living room. The silence between them was deafening. Michael sipped his whiskey quietly, the liquid burning his throat, a bitter reminder of the escape he sought from the reality he had created. "I did what I had to do," he whispered finally, almost to himself. I couldn't let anyone. I couldn't lose you all." Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand answers. Yet the words caught in her chest. Instead, she nodded silently, her mind racing. "We are living with a crime now, a secret that could destroy everything. How long can this last before it consumes us all?" Days bled into weeks. Michael's behavior remained outwardly normal, but internally strained. Sarah continued to observe, a silent sentinel, aware that every lie, every concealment, added layers of tension within their home. Ethan and Lily remained blissfully unaware, their innocence a fragile shield against the storm. Yet Sarah feared that it would not last forever. In the quiet moments, Sarah found herself replaying the accident over and over. What if someone saw? What if someone remembered? What if? The hypothetical scenarios were endless, each one a potential catastrophe. She realized the magnitude of the moral chasm they had crossed, a line once crossed that could never be uncrossed. And Michael, oblivious to the depth of her fear, sat alone in his private world of guilt and self-justification. believing he had protected the family. But protection, Sarah knew, came at a cost. And that cost was slowly consuming their lives from within, seeping into every conversation, every glance, every gesture. The silence in the house was no longer just absence of sound. It was a presence of guilt, of tension, of moral compromise. And as the night deepened, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing that the fragile peace they maintained was nothing more than a thin veneer, ready to shatter with the slightest touch. The accident had changed everything, and though no one spoke of it, the shadow of that night loomed over them, unyielding, relentless, a secret that demanded attention, a truth waiting patiently to be uncovered. Years passed. The suburban streets of their neighborhood remained quiet and picturesque, lined with neatly trimmed hedges and perfectly painted mailboxes. On the surface, life seemed normal for the family. Michael worked long hours at his corporate job, climbing steadily up the managerial ladder. Sarah devoted herself to the home, ensuring that Ethan and Lily grew up in an environment that appeared safe, warm, and loving. The laughter of the children echoed through the hallways, a fragile shield against the dark secret festering just beneath the surface. Yet Sarah could never fully escape the memory of that night. The accident had left invisible scars that ran deeper than any physical wound. She caught herself staring at darkened roads, imagining the sound of tires skidding, the metallic crash, the terrible weight of the guilt her husband carried. Every phone call, every news report about a car accident or a reckless driver made her heart leap with fear. What if someone remembered? What if someone recognized him? What if? Ethan, now in his early teens, had begun to develop a sharp sense of observation. He noticed details most adults overlooked. The slight tremor in his father's hands when he picked up a newspaper, the way his mother's voice changed when the topic of safety or responsibility arose, the way the family car seemed to attract more scrutiny than it deserved. Teenagers often see what adults think they are hiding, and Ethan was no exception. It happened one afternoon while Ethan was cleaning out the attic. He stumbled across an old box of clippings, yellowed and brittle with age. Among them, he found a newspaper article describing a tragic hit-and-run on a rural road outside town. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Man critically injured in mysterious accident. Driver flees scene." Ethan's eyes widened as he read further. He recognized the date, the same night his father had driven them home after the party years ago. A wave of memories crashed over him. The unusual quiet of the car that night, the tight grip his father had on the steering wheel, the smell of alcohol lingering faintly in the cabin, the red stains he had glimpsed when his father had opened the trunk. Ethan felt a cold knot of fear twist in his stomach. The puzzle pieces fit together in a way that no one had told him to see, yet he could not unsee them now. That evening, over dinner, Ethan's mind raced. He watched his father laugh at a joke, the same practiced laugh that hid panic beneath its surface. He observed his mother pouring tea, her hands shaking ever so slightly, the shadow of worry etched into her brow. Something is wrong. Something terrible happened that night, he thought, the words echoing in his mind. Sarah noticed the intensity in Ethan's gaze. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, her voice light but cautious. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "Mom, do you remember the night when Dad drove us home from the party? That accident that happened?" Sarah's hand froze over her cup. The color drained from her face, and she took a slow, steadying breath. "Why would you ask that now?" she murmured, trying to sound calm. I was cleaning the attic and found an old newspaper. It mentioned a man hurt in a hit-and-run that night. I remembered some things, and I just want to understand," Ethan said, his voice tight with a mix of curiosity and fear. Sarah's mind raced. She had promised herself to shield her children from this secret, but now the truth was pressing forward with an unstoppable force. She chose her words carefully, attempting to calm the storm without shattering their family's fragile stability. "Ethan, some things from the past are complicated. Not everything can be explained easily. Let's focus on what we can do now, okay?" But Ethan's gaze never wavered. There was a new determination in his eyes, a dawning understanding that the adults in his life had been protecting secrets not for justice, but for their own comfort. He's starting to see through it, Sarah thought, a cold shiver running down her spine. As the night grew darker and the house settled into uneasy silence, Ethan lay awake in his room. He turned the newspaper article over in his hands, tracing the letters with a trembling finger. Dad, could he really have done this? Could he have hidden it all these years? The questions spiraled in his mind, growing heavier with each passing second. Meanwhile, Michael sat in the study, pretending to read a financial report. Yet his thoughts were consumed with paranoia. He had hidden the truth for so long, meticulously covering tracks and crafting plausible stories, but the inevitability of discovery had begun to weigh on him. He could feel the walls closing in, every creak in the house, every inquisitive glance from Ethan, every question that lingered unasked made him restless. The invisible threads connecting past actions to present consequences were taut, and any wrong move could unravel the careful fabric of their lives. Michael knew that children were clever and observant, and the possibility that Ethan had uncovered the truth filled him with dread. Sarah, in her bedroom, stared out the window into the darkness. The moonlight reflected off the empty street, and she wondered how long they could continue to hide from reality. She thought about her own guilt for choosing silence, for letting the accident remain a secret, for shielding her husband at the potential cost of moral integrity. The family slept fitfully that night, each member haunted by different shadows. Michael by fear, Sarah by guilt, Ethan by dawning awareness, and Lily by the invisible tension she couldn't yet comprehend. The past had crept into their present, and the silent truth waited patiently for its moment to be revealed. By morning, the air was heavy with unspoken questions. Ethan resolved, quietly, that he would watch, observe, and perhaps confront the truth when the moment came. The delicate balance of their family had been disrupted, and there was no going back to the simple innocence they once believed in. The traces of the past had been unearthed, and the night of the accident, long buried, had begun to assert itself over the life they thought was normal. Secrets have a way of surfacing, and Ethan was no longer willing to let the shadows dictate the narrative of his family's life without answers. The house felt different that morning. Ethan moved quietly through the kitchen, trying not to draw attention to the sudden weight pressing down on his chest. The scent of fresh toast and coffee should have been comforting, but instead, it reminded him of the hidden tension threading through every corner of their home. His mother, Sarah, hummed softly as she prepared breakfast, a facade of calm masking the anxiety that clung to her like a second skin. Michael, as always, arrived later, his face pale and weary, but he forced a smile, greeting his family with a cheer that sounded hollow to Ethan's newly alert ears. The day unfolded like any other, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere. He replayed the newspaper article repeatedly, thinking about the man who had been hit that night and the invisible web that had spun itself around his family. He tried to recall every detail from that evening years ago. The smell of alcohol, the blood on the car, the way his father had gripped the wheel. And each recollection added a layer to his growing unease. After school, Ethan retreated to his room, shutting the door behind him. He needed space to think, to sift through fragments of memories, to make sense of the unease gnawing at his mind. He took out a notebook and began to write down everything he remembered, every incongruity, every small lie he had subconsciously detected over the years. Even mundane details now seemed suspicious. The way his father never discussed parties after they happened, the hurried way his mother sometimes erased traces from the family calendar. Later that evening, during dinner, Ethan tested the waters. "Mom," he began hesitantly, glancing at Sarah, "do you ever think about accidents? Ones people don't talk about." Sarah froze mid-bite. Her fork hovered in the air as her eyes darted toward Michael. The tension in the room thickened, and Ethan felt it like a tangible weight. "Why are you asking that, Ethan?" she said carefully, trying to maintain an ordinary tone. I read something today about a man hurt in a hit-and-run years ago. The date. It was the same night you drove us home from the party, Ethan said, his voice measured but insistent. Sarah's face paled, and she set her fork down slowly. Michael's gaze sharpened, the protective mask of the father faltering for just a moment. A cold sweat prickled at Ethan's neck. He knew he had touched a nerve. "That was a long time ago," Sarah replied finally, her voice quieter, almost trembling. "Some things from the past are complicated. Sometimes it's better not to dig into them." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had expected denial, but not the raw tension, the unspoken fear. He realized then that the threads he had pulled on were fraying something fragile but dangerous. "Mom, I just want to understand. I need to know the truth," he said, leaning forward slightly, the notebook open between them like a shield and a weapon. Michael cleared his throat, trying to regain composure, but Ethan caught the subtle tremor in his voice, the tiny hitch that betrayed years of suppressed panic. The father-son dynamic shifted imperceptibly. Ethan felt the weight of knowledge pressing on him, threatening to crush the veneer of normality that had held their family together for so long. The following days became a careful dance. Ethan watched his father closely, noting every micro-expression, every slip of tension, every forced laugh. Michael seemed perpetually on edge, reacting to seemingly innocuous events with barely contained panic. Sarah, for her part, attempted to maintain equilibrium, but the shadow of dread in her eyes betrayed her. Ethan felt a sense of power he had never experienced before, mixed with a deep fear. He knew that one wrong move could shatter their fragile stability. At school, Ethan's thoughts were consumed by the past, but he acted normally, smiling, chatting, attending classes, all while storing the secrets of that night like precious, dangerous jewels. He noticed patterns in his father's behavior that had once seemed trivial. The avoidance of certain streets, the careful attention to who was around when they drove, the quick changes in topic whenever the word accident surfaced. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan crept into the attic again, flashlight in hand, revisiting the dusty boxes of memories. He traced the edges of newspapers, photos, and mementos, each item reinforcing a narrative he had only begun to piece together. A tattered glove from the back seat of the car, an old party invitation, a receipt for repairs. The fragments painted a story that had remained hidden under layers of time and denial. He finally realized he was no longer a passive observer in his family's life. The accident, the lies, and the unspoken fears had placed him in a pivotal role. He had the knowledge that could redefine their lives. But what do I do with it? The question haunted him as he stared out the attic window at the quiet suburban street, moonlight reflecting off the wet asphalt below. Sarah noticed the subtle change in her son almost immediately. His questions became more pointed, his demeanor more serious. One evening, she confronted him gently in the living room, voice low, almost a whisper. "Ethan, I can see that something's bothering you. You're noticing things, aren't you?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded, the weight of truth settling heavily on his shoulders. "I know something happened that night. I need to know everything," he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the dam of silence breaking. She wanted to protect her children, to maintain the illusion of safety, but she realized that some truths demanded to be confronted. She reached out, taking Ethan's hand in hers, trembling as she did so. "I want to protect you, all of you. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, but I thought keeping quiet would keep us safe." Ethan felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and understanding. The walls of his world had shifted, and he now stood at a crossroads between loyalty to his parents and the imperative of truth. The seed of doubt had grown into a forest of questions, and he realized that the choice he made next could redefine the entire family dynamic. That night, Ethan lay awake, contemplating the path forward. He understood the gravity of what he had uncovered, the delicate balance between justice, morality, and familial loyalty. The threads of secrecy, once thought buried, had been unearthed, and now there was no turning back. The truth was calling, and he knew he had to listen. The house was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that presses down, making the walls feel closer, the shadows deeper. Ethan paced back and forth in his room, unable to focus on anything else. The notebook he had filled with observations and questions lay open on his desk, pages brimming with words he had never intended to speak aloud. He knew that sooner or later, he would have to confront his father. The truth could no longer stay hidden, no matter how much it might shatter their family. He waited until the house was silent. His mother, Sarah, had gone to bed early, exhausted from yet another day of masking the truth and managing the invisible tension that hung over them all. Michael, as usual, was in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the table lamp. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat, the weight of the knowledge he carried pressing down on him. Each step to the living room felt like walking on thin ice, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in his chest. "Dad," Ethan called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael's head jerked up, eyes narrowing in cautious surprise. There was a tense silence as the father and son faced each other, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I need to talk to you about that night." Michael's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white against the polished wood. He didn't respond immediately, just studied his son, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, crossing his face. "Ethan, it's late. Can we talk tomorrow?" he suggested, his voice calm but tinged with an edge that made Ethan's stomach twist. "No," Ethan said firmly, taking a step closer. "We can't wait anymore. I know something happened that night. I saw the articles, the papers. I remember things I shouldn't. And I need the truth." Michael's eyes darkened, a shadow passing over his features. He drained his glass, the liquid sloshing, and set it down with a heavy hand. "You weren't supposed to know," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "I did what I thought was best for you, for all of you. I protected this family." Ethan's hands trembled slightly, but he held his ground. "Protected us? By lying? By hiding it? That man, he died, Dad. And we just pretended it didn't happen. How is that protection?" His voice shook, but his eyes remained fixed on his father, seeking answers in the man he had once idolized. Michael ran a hand through his hair, his posture sagging as if the weight of years of guilt were pressing him into the floor. "I panicked," he admitted, voice breaking. "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to lose my family. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep us safe. I never wanted you to be hurt by my mistake." The confession hit Ethan like a physical blow. The man who had always seemed invincible, the one who had been the center of their family's universe, was flawed, human, and terrified. But the anger surged through him, raw and unrelenting. "Safe? Safe for who? You chose to hide the truth, and now it's on all of us. I have memories I can't forget. Mom has carried it silently all these years. And me? I don't know how to even process it." Michael lowered his gaze, voice barely audible. "I know I failed you. I failed Sarah. I failed myself. I don't know if I can fix it. I don't know if it can ever be fixed." Ethan felt a pang of sorrow, but he knew that compassion alone wasn't enough. He needed clarity, understanding, and accountability. "Then we do it together," he said quietly. "We face the truth. I can't live in the shadows of your mistakes. I won't pretend it didn't happen. Not anymore." Michael remained silent, the room filled with the heavy weight of unspoken remorse. Slowly, he nodded, a gesture heavy with resignation. "If you're ready, Ethan, if you really want to know everything, I'll tell you," he said, his voice cracking, the first real vulnerability Ethan had ever seen in him. The conversation stretched for hours. Michael recounted the night of the accident in agonizing detail, the laughter that had turned to horror, the screech of tires on wet asphalt, the man's body struck and tossed aside. He spoke of the panic that had gripped him, the decisions made in a fog of fear, and the unbearable weight of guilt that had followed him into every day since. Ethan listened, alternating between disbelief, anger, and a deep, painful empathy. Sarah joined them later, drawn by the voices, sitting quietly in the doorway. She brought with her years of suppressed anguish, and when she spoke, it was with a trembling voice full of tears. "We carried it together," she said softly. "But we can't anymore. We have to let it out. We have to face the consequences for all our sakes." The night became a crucible of confession and revelation. Ethan understood then that the truth would irrevocably alter their family. But he also realized that it was no longer a question of punishment or revenge. It was a question of integrity, of stepping out of the shadows into accountability. As dawn broke, the family sat together in the living room, exhausted and raw. The tension that had gripped them for years had finally loosened, replaced by a fragile, uneasy clarity. The path ahead was uncertain, but Ethan knew that whatever decisions were made, they would be made with knowledge, honesty, and the full weight of reality on their shoulders. For the first time in years, the house felt like a place where the truth could breathe, even if it was painful, even if it tore apart the illusions they had clung to for so long. And Ethan understood, with a quiet, terrifying certainty, that from this moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. The days after the confession were heavy with silence. Ethan moved through the house like a ghost, each step careful, each glance measured. He had heard the truth from his father, the full weight of the accident and the years of deceit, yet understanding it did little to soften the anger and disappointment that burned within him. Trust, once broken, does not simply mend with words, even when they are confessions soaked in remorse. At breakfast, the clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation felt forced, artificial. Sarah tried to smile, to bridge the chasm that had formed between father and son, but Ethan's eyes avoided Michael entirely. He could no longer look at his father without the image of the man who had driven on that rainy night, who had chosen fear over honesty, who had tried to hide a life-altering crime. "Ethan, please," Sarah said softly, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile morning. "We have to try to move forward. You can't carry this alone." Ethan's hands clenched around his fork. "Move forward? Mom, I don't know if I can." He lied. He put everyone in danger. And I can't pretend that it didn't happen. How are we supposed to just act normal? His voice broke, a mix of rage, hurt, and despair. Michael looked down at his plate, silent, guilt etched into every line of his face. There were no excuses left that could soothe his son's anger. Every gesture he made, every word he had once spoken to comfort or protect, now felt hollow to Ethan. The father he had admired, the man who had been the center of his world, was now just a man who had failed catastrophically. As the week wore on, the emotional distance widened. Ethan retreated to his room, spending hours staring at the walls, replaying memories of the past, laughing dinners, weekend trips, and bedtime stories, all now tainted by the shadow of deception. Each memory was a reminder that the life he had known was built on lies, that the foundation of his family was fractured in ways that could not simply be patched with apologies. Sarah tried to reach him. She left notes on his desk, texts on his phone, offering reassurance and understanding. "We'll figure this out together," she wrote one evening. "You are not alone, but you have to let me help you." Ethan read them, felt the warmth of his mother's love, yet it could not erase the bitter taste of betrayal. He felt torn between his loyalty to the family and his conscience. The knowledge of his father's guilt demanded action, but the thought of tearing his family apart paralyzed him. The more he tried to reconcile these conflicting emotions, the heavier the burden became. One evening, after hours of sitting in silence, Ethan confronted Michael again. "I can't just live like nothing happened. I can't ignore it, Dad. And I can't keep pretending that I don't know. The world deserves to know. The truth, it has to come out." Michael's eyes flickered with fear, desperation creeping in. "Ethan, please, if this gets out, it will destroy us. I made mistakes, yes, but it was one night. One terrible night. You have to understand. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to protect the family. But it's not just about protection anymore," Ethan said firmly, his voice trembling with determination. "It's about responsibility. It's about doing what's right. We can't keep running from this. Not you, not me, not Mom. It has to stop." Sarah, standing in the doorway, watched the exchange with tears in her eyes. She had carried this secret for years, tried to shield her children from the consequences, and yet now the truth had erupted into a force none of them could contain. She stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "He's right about one thing," she said gently. "You can't stay silent forever. But whatever you decide, know that I'm with you. We will face this together." The night stretched on, and for the first time since the confession, Ethan felt a spark of clarity. The anger, though still searing, was now channeled into resolve. He knew what he had to do. He would no longer allow fear or loyalty to dictate his choices. The truth demanded to be revealed, and he could no longer hide behind silence. He packed a small bag the next morning, gathering evidence, notes, and documents that could corroborate the story. His heart pounded with fear, but also with a strange sense of liberation. Every item he placed into the bag was a step toward freedom from the shadows of deceit. The burden of knowing, of carrying the secret alone, had been heavy for too long. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight shift away from himself toward accountability and justice. When he finally left the house, Sarah's eyes followed him, filled with both pride and sorrow. Michael stood silently, the enormity of his son's decision reflected in his haunted gaze. Ethan walked down the street, each step echoing in the stillness, carrying not just his own truth, but the fate of a family that had been living in the shadow of lies for far too long. Ethan's decision was no longer about punishment or vengeance. It was about integrity, about confronting the consequences of hidden actions, and about ensuring that the truth, no matter how painful, finally saw the light of day. By the time he reached the police station, his resolve had crystallized. He walked through the doors, heart racing, and requested to speak with an officer. "I need to report a crime," he said, voice steady despite the trembling inside. "A hit and run from years ago. I have information about it. It involves my father." The officer looked up, surprised, but Ethan didn't falter. He handed over the documents, detailed his knowledge, and began to recount the events of that fateful night. Each word was heavy with truth, each sentence a step toward redemption, not just for him, but for the fractured family he loved and for the life that had been destroyed by one reckless decision long ago. As the officer took notes, Ethan felt a strange sense of release. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and emotional turmoil. Yet for the first time, he was no longer trapped by silence or fear. The truth had been set into motion, and nothing would ever be the same again. The police station was sterile, cold, and impersonal, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions raging inside Ethan. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting harsh shadows across the walls and floor. He had never felt so small and yet so resolute. Every step that morning, from leaving the family home to walking into this station, had been a journey of courage he hadn't known he possessed. He approached the front desk, and the officer who greeted him looked up with mild curiosity. Ethan's voice was calm, steady, despite the adrenaline and fear coursing through him. "I need to report a hit-and-run accident. It happened years ago, and I have information about it. My father was involved." The officer's eyes narrowed, scanning Ethan for a hint of hesitation. There was none. Ethan reached into his bag and retrieved the stack of documents, newspaper clippings, and old photographs he had gathered. "I found these," he said, handing them over. "They detail the event, and I can testify about what I know. It's time the truth comes out." The officer took the materials carefully, laying them on the counter. "You understand this could have serious consequences for you, your father, and your family?" he asked, his tone cautious but firm. Ethan nodded. "I understand. I've thought about it for years. But I can't live with the secret anymore. It's bigger than me, bigger than our family. Someone was hurt. Someone died. It's time to face it." Sarah, who had accompanied him to provide support, stayed close but silent. Her hand rested lightly on his back, a steady presence amidst the storm of tension. Michael, however, was absent. Ethan knew he could not face his father here. Not yet. This decision had been his alone, a choice to act on conscience rather than fear, loyalty, or guilt. The officers led Ethan to an interview room, small and unadorned, with a table and a few chairs. He sat down, laying out the evidence meticulously. Each document told a story, each photo a memory that had been buried under years of lies. He recounted the events of that fateful night in detail. The drive home after the party, the alcohol, the accident, and his father's desperate attempt to hide the truth. As he spoke, his voice trembled at times, but he pressed on. The weight of years of silence, the burden of carrying the secret, began to lift. For the first time, he felt a strange liberation, the relief that comes from telling the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous. Meanwhile, Michael sat alone in their home, the absence of his son piercing deeper than any law or reprimand could. The house felt hollow, the laughter of children and the warmth of family replaced by a deafening emptiness. For the first time, he truly understood the consequences of his actions, not just the potential legal repercussions, but the emotional devastation he had wrought on the people he loved most. Hours passed at the station. Officers interviewed Ethan thoroughly, taking notes, recording statements, and cross-referencing the evidence. Each question, each pause, and each note taken echoed in his mind, a reminder of the magnitude of what he had set into motion. He was not only confronting his father's past, but also reshaping the future of his entire family. By late afternoon, the officers had compiled enough to move forward. Ethan stepped out of the interview room, his legs heavy, but his resolve unwavering. Sarah was waiting, her eyes filled with pride and quiet sorrow. She took his hand as they walked through the sterile hallways, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of justice. Michael arrived at the station shortly thereafter, summoned after Ethan's statements had been recorded. When father and son finally faced each other, the air was thick with tension, unspoken emotions, and years of repressed guilt. Michael's eyes, once so full of confidence and authority, were now haunted, trembling with the recognition of his own failures. "Ethan," Michael began, his voice cracking. I never wanted this. I only wanted to protect you. To protect all of you." Ethan's gaze was steady, though his chest ached with the remnants of pain and betrayal. "I understand that now, Dad. But protection isn't worth hiding a life or lying for years. People died. Someone should have been held accountable. You should have been honest with us from the start." Michael lowered his head, the gravity of his son's words sinking in. I know. I see that now. And I'm so sorry. More than you can ever imagine. But I can't undo what I did. I can only face it." As the officers escorted Michael away for questioning, Ethan and Sarah remained behind, absorbing the quiet aftermath. It was not a moment of triumph or celebration, but one of reckoning, of truth finally surfacing from beneath layers of deception. The family had endured unimaginable strain, yet in that reckoning, there was also the possibility of renewal, a chance to rebuild on honesty, no matter how difficult. In the weeks that followed, legal proceedings unfolded. Michael faced charges for the hit and run, the cover-up, and related offenses. Ethan provided full testimony, detailing the events and confirming his father's confession. The media reported the case, and the community watched the family navigate public scrutiny with dignity, grief, and courage. Sarah became the emotional anchor, guiding both sons through the turbulence, maintaining stability in the home, and offering unwavering support. Though the family was fractured, they began to discover resilience they had not known they possessed. Trust had been broken, yes, but through accountability, reflection, and shared commitment, they started to rebuild. Ethan learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Michael learned that honesty, though delayed, is the only path toward redemption. And Sarah realized that protecting loved ones sometimes requires painful choices, even when it risks heartbreak. The final scene finds the family standing together in their living room, the evening sun casting long shadows across the walls. There is silence, but it is no longer suffocating. It is a moment of quiet understanding, a fragile peace forged from the fire of truth. The past cannot be undone, yet the future, uncertain and daunting, is theirs to shape anew. And as Ethan looks at his father, now humbled and penitent, he understands that life is not defined solely by mistakes, but by the courage to confront them, to endure, and ultimately, to seek reconciliation, even when it seems impossible.